Well, now I'm in trouble. I knew I wasn't going to be able to match up to the Survivor gal, but I thought at least I'm coming after the Postal Service guy, and then I find that he's a stand-up comic himself. And this is a problem for me because as the short form bio in the registration packet say, I'm the guy that talks about arcane legal issues. My most recent writings are on things like the Complex Litigation Center in Philadelphia and proxy advisory services. And I figured that stuff would probably bore all the non-lawyers in the room and even the super litigators who are now getting double shout-outs like Wade Smith and Buddy Wester, right? So instead, I decided I'm going to step back from that a minute and talk about a subject that I could easily cover in 7 minutes, capitalism. And I'm going to do that because I work at a free market think tank, quote unquote, and because the financial markets have sort of had a recent collapse, as we're all well aware. And so I want to start out here with just a few facts. Since 1800, the onset of the Industrial Revolution, the world population has increased sixfold. And over that same period of time, the per capita income, the average inflation-adjusted earnings of the average person on the planet has increased 16-fold. Now, that's pretty phenomenal when you consider that throughout most of the rest of all of human history, 99.9% of all the people on the planet, we're living on the equivalent of about what's $1 a day in today's dollars. Now, the growth's been even more phenomenal here at the vanguard, the technological frontier in the United States, where as opposed to a 16-fold increase since 1800, we've witnessed a 36-fold increase in GDP per capita. Put differently, in 1800, the average American would earn in today's dollars about $1,343 and live to the ripe old age of 39. Now since 1957, when the first Morehead scholars graduated here, we've seen a continuation of this trend and a magnification worldwide to some degree. Particularly want to emphasize a few points here. The average human being on the planet over the last 50 years has seen his income triple. It's only gone down in 6 countries in the world. And at the same time, we've seen the average lifespan increase by 1/3 over a 50-year period. Another interesting fact, over the last 50 years, this same basic period of time, the world population has doubled. But even with twice as many people, the absolute number of people living in $1-a-day poverty has fallen in half. Now, I think these figures are pretty compelling, and given capitalism's proven ability to improve human well-being and to reduce absolute poverty, I am someone who's a little bit skeptical of some of those who are worried profoundly about inequality in the system. And I say this as someone who lives in a house that once belonged to John D. Rockefeller Sr. Now, so that you don't think I'm living in wild opulence, this is the house where he put up his chauffeur. But let's think a little bit about these robber barons, so-called robber barons of the late 19th century. Undoubtedly, they amassed enormous quantities of wealth. But what else happened? Between 1870 and 1900, Rockefeller drove down the price of oil by 80%. Carnegie drove down the price of steel by 75%. And Vanderbilt drove down the price of rail by 90%. And over this 30-year window, the average American saw his per capita income increase by 2/3. That, in essence, is what capitalism does. Now, I think it's important to stress that government plays a vital role here, indeed a critical and necessary role. And the 3 principles that, in my view, undergird the capitalist system, property rights, voluntary exchange, and enforceable contracts, all critically depend upon government, which enforces contract rights, which protects people and property against force and fraud. And without that, we don't have private property. Without that, we don't have free exchange. And I don't mean to suggest here that minimalist posture is the only thing that government's good for either. I think government plays an important salutary role beyond that, and I want to point to 2 broad areas here. The first is that government supplies a necessary corrective to what economists call the collective action problem. This is both in the positive sense, by providing so-called public goods that we can't in the private market, things like roads or military defense. And the second is in the negative sense, by deterring negative externalities, the sorts of things like environmental pollution that a lot of us worry about. And secondly, at a broad level, at least in our modern affluent world, in my view, a good thing, and certainly a good thing in the view of the observed preferences across most of the developed world's populations, we do have a social safety net provided by government to take care of those who are unfortunate enough not to be able to take care of themselves. And I think by highlighting these last two functions of government, we shed a little bit of context on the political debates going on in this country and around the developed world here in a heated political system. Whatever rhetoric is thrown out there, the parties here are fighting to some degree on the margins. Whatever anyone says, by and large, they accept the fundamental capitalist system that we live under. Now, I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish here, and at the risk of throwing a bit of cold water on here, I do want to talk about three things that do keep me up at night as someone who's the father of a young child, and with one very imminently, hopefully not during this speech, on the way. And the first of those is to say that the remarkable technological progress we've seen, that's really the driver of economic growth in our system, has also led to the creation of so-called weapons of mass destruction, which generate a horrific risk for all of humanity, and one that's exacerbated by our commercial system and its necessary openness. The second is, and notwithstanding the fact that environmental indicators have actually been getting better in recent decades in the capitalist countries, it certainly could be the case that human activity but not limited to the emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, could be generating potential risks in terms of weather pattern and climate that could reduce the long-run well-being of humanity. I personally tend to be optimistic that technology can really help us mitigate this risk, but I don't think we should just assume the risk doesn't exist. Now, at a final level, something which we just heard about in terms of the debt and what have you, this is something that faces all of us in the developed world, and it really stems from a confluence of two concurrent trends. The first of those is basically what we've seen over the last 40 years, basically my lifetime, a slowdown at the technology frontier of productivity growth. And the second is a significant demographic shift. Longer lifespans, which are a good thing that we've talked about, as well as lower birth rates. So when you combine lower birth rates and longer lifespans and slower productivity growth, undoubtedly that puts a lot of pressure on the social insurance programs that we've had develop here in the wealthier countries in the world. And I don't think there's an easy fix here. We have seen productivity growth pick back up since the mid-90s. I do think there's a lot of potential in new wave technology, but substantially what you had in the middle part of the 20th century was to some degree, a one-off significant boost, a bump to the productivity growth rate, which flowed from the universalization of education. We're here at a university, that's appropriate to acknowledge, but you can't educate over 100% of the people. And so once you've had that productivity bump, you're unlikely to return back to those significantly higher productivity growth rates you had in the middle part of the 20th century. That presents a significant challenge, albeit I think it's one that's a political challenge rather than an economic one. So overall, in my view, I think it's beyond dispute that the power of capitalism to improve human well-being and to reduce human suffering is really not a debatable premise. And to paraphrase sort of Churchill on democracy, we may not like this or we may be uncomfortable with facets of capitalism, but it's unambiguously better than any other system that's ever been tried in all of history. And maybe more lightheartedly, given that given that over the last 50 years, we've seen continuing growth here, and given that we're living at a time in human history that is truly unique in terms of how well off we are, maybe we could paraphrase our basketball coach Roy Williams and say that we're daggum fortunate.